Moving In is the second episode of the first season of the new Frasier. This is directed, of course, by the wonderful James Burrows, and this discussion's probably not going to be anywhere near as long as my discussion of the first episode because everything was new with the first episode, but we're still establishing things here because things are moving in a forward direction. But there are still things that need to be aired out, discussions that need to be had between certain characters. So from this point on, there will be spoilers for specific things that happen in the episode. I won't go into quite as much detail as I did with the first episode, but there are definitely some things that I want to talk about, things that I absolutely adored. But to sum up very briefly, I loved it. Such a brilliant episode, really pleased with how well things are going for Frasier so far. And it starts off with something that very firmly says this is set much later than the original Frasier, and that's Baby Shark. Baby Shark will be in my head for a very long time after this. And we also learn that Frasier's voice is very soothing and helps Baby John to go to sleep. And I have to say that's absolutely true. I think Kelsey Grammer has an absolutely beautiful voice, and I can completely understand why it would help to put Baby John to sleep. And it also gives a reason for Eve to come over to the apartment and to bring her forward into more of the episodes, which I think is a pretty good device to use. So we do get to see a lot of Frasier's new apartment, and I will say it's a lot darker than I would have liked. The shape of the apartment's not that dissimilar to the shape of classic Frasier's apartment, but there's a lot of dark wood and it's just not as bright and as open, and I don't really love that about it, and it still feels a little bit too cramped. And that's not just me comparing it to his previous apartment, that's also an observation insofar as saying it does feel like a very dark enclosed space when I compare it to other sitcoms. Most other sitcoms have a very wide open, brightly lit room, and that's not the case here. So I'm keen to see if my opinion changes on that going forward. But to begin with, I'm not the biggest fan of that space. We do have a lot of discussion, and actually a lot of this episode is very similar to discussions that were had between Frasier and Martin. Because Frasier, as he didn't want Martin's chair, he also doesn't really want a lot of Freddy's personal belongings taking up space and looking out of place with his decor. I like that Frasier hasn't changed in that regard, but I also like the fact that they addressed this pretty much straight away. Whereas with Martin, it was something that kind of ate away at him. It was something that took a little bit of time to really flesh out a bit more. But here they got to the point straight away, and they were able to air their differences in a way that I thought was very effective. We also have a very moving but a very interesting scene in the bar. This allows us to introduce some more characters. We get to meet some of Freddy's friends down at the bar, and we also learn that Freddy had told his friends that his father had died. Frasier did the exact same thing in Cheers. When Frasier first came into Cheers, he told the gang that his father was dead. At the time, I don't think it was necessarily a lie. But when they decided to obviously bring Martin into Frasier, they had to backtrack and say that actually Frasier had said that because he'd fallen out with his father. And we get a kind of similar thing here with Freddy. And I think the whole discussion there is really eye-opening. This episode is really about the relationship between Frasier and Freddy. And I think they get a lot of things out in the open. They have a lot of big discussions that I think will hopefully make things easier for them with their relationship going forward, but I still think there are going to be times when they don't exactly see eye to eye. And we also get a mention of Freddy's mother, and I do say Freddy's mother as she wasn't mentioned by name, and Frasier blaming her for things as he so often has done. It made me smile. The whole "I'm your father" scene was just beautifully played, wonderfully done. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Very funny at times, emotional at others. And we do get a little bit of Alan in this. Part of me starting to see bits of Coach in Alan. Not completely, but there's this kind of lovable, scatterbrained quality to Alan that just reminded me a little bit of Coach. Not completely, but there are just bits of that kind of personality in there. And I'm loving Alan as a character. I really can't wait to see what else they do with him. We also still have a glimmer of Frasier's celebrity, as he's going to be doing an interview for the Boston Globe. People at the bar recognize him. I think it's really important that we don't lose that part of his personality where he has this adoring public. Obviously, I'm assuming it's not going to be quite as prominent as it was when he was at KCL, but I'm keen to see what they do with that as well. Needless to say, moving in is a brilliant Frasier episode, a really strong second episode. I really can't wait for the rest of the show. A bit upset that we're only getting one episode a week when we're living in an age of binge watching. I don't have patience, but I know they will be worth the wait. Cannot wait to see what else this season has in store.